There's an entire dragon missing from Game of Thrones. Not Daenerys, not Jon Snow. Someone the show quietly erased, but who, in the books, is already sailing toward Westeros with an army and a crown practically waiting for him. In the pages of A Song of Ice and Fire, there's a boy calling himself Aegon Targaryen, Rhaegar's firstborn son, the child everyone thinks was smashed against the wall during Robert's rebellion. The problem? According to the books, he's alive. Trained for kingship since he could walk and about to make his move. If he's real, Daenerys isn't the last Targaryen at all. If he's fake, he might be the boldest con artist Westeros has ever seen. Think about what that actually means. For years, fans of the show were arguing over who the rightful ruler should be, while a completely different Targaryen heir has been moving in the background of the books, gathering troops, winning over lords, and landing in the Stormlands before Daenerys even sets foot near King's Landing. This isn't some side character tucked away in a footnote. This kid's claim, if it's real, blows up Daenerys' entire rightful queen narrative. And if it's fake, then the whole realm is about to bend the knee to a dragon made out of lies, whispers, and very expensive planning. Because here's the real question. Is young Griff, the boy raised as Aegon Targaryen, a miracle survivor finally returning to claim what's his? Or a carefully crafted illusion built by masterminds in the shadows who don't care what his blood really is as long as he looks convincing on a throne? Is he Rhaegar's lost son? A hidden Blackfire pretender? Or just a silver-haired boy handed a story and told to live it? The books never come out and say it. Instead, they leave a trail of hints, odd details, and prophecies that point in different directions, and readers have been arguing about it ever since. And that's where things get interesting, because once you start tugging at the loose threads in a story, they don't just mess with his claim. They tangle up Daenerys, Jon Snow, the Golden Company, ancient rebellions, and the entire idea of what makes a real king in Westeros. So before we can decide whether young Griff is a rightful heir or the greatest mummer's trick in the Seven Kingdoms, we have to start with something simple. Who is he supposed to be? Young Griff enters a story quietly, just a blue-haired teenager on a riverboat introduced as the son of a sellsword named Griff. Nothing about him screams future king. It's only when Tyrion Lannister joins their journey in A Dance with Dragons that the cracks in this disguise start to show. And then comes the reveal. Griff isn't Griff at all. He's Jon Connington, former Hand of the King and one of Rhaegar's closest friends. A man who lost everything after Robert's rebellion and has spent his life drowning in guilt and exile. His son, the blue-haired boy Tyrion keeps side-eyeing, is no Seltsor's child. According to Jon Connington, he is Aegon Targaryen, Rhaegar's firstborn son. He says Varys swapped baby Aegon with a different infant, some poor boy from Pisswater Bend, right before the Lannisters sacked the city. The real prince, hidden beneath this new identity, was smuggled across the narrow sea and raised in secret while the world believed he died. No one stopped to question whether the child was really the prince. In the chaos, people accepted the easiest truth, that the boy was dead. And that's exactly the kind of environment where a swap story can thrive without ever needing to be proven. But here's the uncomfortable twist. For Varys' rescue plan to make sense, he would have needed to predict the condition of both children's bodies before the city even fell. He would have had to assume the mountain would destroy one child beyond recognition while leaving the other identifiable. That isn't clever planning, that's celestial-level luck. Even for a mastermind like Varys, that level of foresight doesn't just stretch believability, it snaps it in half. And then there's Varys himself. If this plot were driven by fierce Targaryen loyalty, it might make sense. But Varys isn't a Targaryen idealist. He tells Ned Stark that he serves the realm, not a family, not a dynasty, certainly not the bloodline that produced Aerys II, the king who roasted his own subjects alive and nearly destroyed the kingdom. So why raise Rhaegar's son? What makes Aegon, specifically Aegon, worth years of risk, money, secrets, and planning? Saving a prince for honor or loyalty doesn't match who Varys is. Raising an ideal ruler in a controlled environment does. And that begs the question, does Varys care who young Griff is? or only who he appears to be. Even the boy himself feels oddly polished, too trained, too sculpted into perfection. Every weakness of past kings is neatly corrected in him, like someone engineered a prototype monarch, compassionate enough to win hearts, disciplined enough to lead armies, educated enough to sound wise, humble enough to seem safe. Real heroes grow up flawed, arrogant, frightened, entitled, unpredictable. Young Griff feels curated. And then comes the biggest crack in the entire story, the Golden Company. This is a sellsword army built from the descendants of Blackfyre supporters, bastards and loyalists who spent generations trying to overthrow the Targaryens. Their entire identity is rooted in one idea: return from exile under a true Blackfyre king. For a century, they refused to support Targaryens. They refused to break contracts for politics. They refused to bend to anyone who wasn't their dragon. And suddenly, they're cheerfully throwing their full weight behind a random Targaryen heir they've never met, breaking a contract for him, something they've never done before. That isn't a coincidence. It's a siren. Everything about young Griff's perfect story starts to feel like a mask, beautifully painted, but hollow if you tap it. There are too many missing pieces, too many convenient details, too many motivations that don't align with the people involved. It's not that the story is impossible, it's that it's too clean, too heroic, too cinematic for George R. R. Martin's world, where truth is always messy and heroes always bleed. And once you see the cracks, it becomes impossible to unsee them, because behind each one is the same question echoing again and again. If this story doesn't add up, then who exactly is young Griff? And why are so many powerful people so desperate for us to believe his name is Aegon Targaryen? To understand the real danger behind young Griff's identity, you have to step backwards. Way before Robert's Rebellion, way before Daenerys, way before the Mad King. Because buried in Westerosi history, there's a second Targaryen dynasty, one the world spent a century trying to erase. A family that looked like Targaryens, fought like Targaryens, claimed the same blood, but believed the Iron Throne should have been theirs. And this is where the story stops being a mystery and starts becoming a pattern. It begins with Daemon Blackfyre, the most infamous Targaryen bastard ever born. King Aegon IV legitimized all his bastards on his deathbed, but Daemon wasn't just any son. He was given Blackfyre, the ancestral Targaryen sword. In a world ruled by symbols, this one gesture was a spark thrown on dry tinder. Many saw Blackfyre as the mark of the true heir. Daemon saw it that way too. And then the rebellion started. Over the next century, the Blackfyres launched 5 separate uprisings, each bloodier than the last, each trying to take the Iron Throne from the main Targaryen line. They failed again and again, but every defeat only drove their supporters further east, into exile. Those exiles didn't disappear, they regrouped, they hardened, they passed their hatred down to their children like inheritance. And from that exiled anger, the Golden Company was born. Not a normal sellsword army, not even close. These men were descendants of Blackfyre supporters, some bastards, some nobles, some legitimate but dispossessed. The moment the Golden Company breaks a contract, something they've built their identity on avoiding doing, should set off alarm bells. They didn't do it for Daenerys, they didn't do it for Viserys, they didn't do it for any true-born Targaryen before. But they did it for this boy. Why? Because their loyalty was never to the Targaryen Red Dragon. Their loyalty was to the Blackfyre Black Dragon. And that's when Valyrio Mopodis drops the line that changes everything. Black or red, a dragon is still a dragon. He says it casually, brushing off the distinction Tyrion tries to make. But it's not casual. It's precise. It's a hint wearing a smile. In the end, everything circles back to one deceptively simple question, one that cuts deeper than bloodlines or banners. Does it even matter if young Griff is truly Aegon Targaryen, if everyone believes he is? Because in Westeros, truth has never ruled the realm. Perception has. The Iron Throne doesn't care whose blood flows in your veins. It only cares whose name echoes loudest in the halls of power. And young Griff's name, Aegon Targaryen, the lost prince, the returned heir, has already begun reshaping the map before most people even know he exists. This is where Varys' most famous line stops being a philosophy lesson and becomes the spine of young Griff's entire arc.
Power resides where men believe it resides.
A boy raised in exile, polished in secret, carried across the sea by mummers and schemers and exiled soldiers, has now stepped into a world ready to be enchanted by a story. This isn't about whether his blood is pure. It's about whether his story is irresistible. And young Griff's story is irresistible. Think about the three possibilities surrounding him, each one more dramatic than the last. 1. He is Aegon VI, a miracle survivor, snatched away from death by the most unlikely rescue in Westerosi history. If this is true, then the Targaryen dynasty didn't just survive, it was reforged in secret, waiting for the perfect moment to return. 2. He's a hidden Blackfire, the living embodiment of a dynasty believed to be dead, a return of not just one lost prince, but of an entire forgotten war. If this is true, then young Griff isn't just a pretender. He's the culmination of 5 failed rebellions stretching back more than a century. 3. He's neither. Not a Targaryen, not a Blackfire, not anything special by blood. Just a silver-haired boy molded into a king by 2 master manipulators who understand that symbols are stronger than truth. To the small folk, he's a promise. To the lords, he's a strategic opportunity. To Daenerys, he's a threat. To Jon Snow, he's a complication. And to the reader, he's the biggest question mark in the entire Targaryen legacy.